Most people think quiet people don't notice much because they don't react loudly. They don't interrupt conversations. They don't constantly try to become the center of attention, so people assume they're disconnected, unaware, maybe even weak. But the truth is usually the complete opposite. Quiet people often notice everything. The slight change in your tone, the forced smile you tried to hide, the awkward silence after someone says something uncomfortable, the way two people suddenly act differently around each other. While everyone else is busy trying to be seen, quiet people are usually watching. And psychology explains why this happens. When a person speaks less, their attention naturally shifts toward observation. Instead of focusing on what they're going to say next, their brain starts processing the environment around them. That's why quiet people often notice body language, emotional shifts, nervous habits, fake enthusiasm, hidden tension, passive aggression without even trying. And the strange thing is, most people reveal themselves constantly. Humans leak emotions every single day through unconscious behaviors. A delayed response, avoiding eye contact, crossed arms, a fake laugh that sounds slightly forced, a sudden change in posture. Most people never notice these details. Quiet people do, because silence sharpens awareness. And over time, that awareness becomes almost automatic. That's also why many quiet people seem mentally exhausted, because their brains rarely stop processing information. After conversations end, they replay everything: the tone, the pauses, the expressions, the energy shifts, the hidden meaning behind certain words. While others forget the interaction immediately, quiet people continue analyzing it for hours, sometimes days. Not because they enjoy overthinking, but because their minds naturally search for patterns. And once someone becomes highly observant, it becomes difficult to ignore what they see, especially when it comes to people. Quiet people often notice things others completely miss, like when someone secretly dislikes another person but pretends to be friendly, or when someone acts confident publicly, but insecure privately, or when a person suddenly changes personalities depending on who enters the room. Observant minds catch those inconsistencies quickly because human behavior is repetitive. People repeat emotional patterns, insecurities, manipulation tactics, coping mechanisms, hidden fears. And over time, quiet people learn how to recognize those patterns almost instantly. That's why they're usually harder to manipulate, because they pay more attention to behavior than words. Your words may sound convincing, but your body language says something else. Your tone says something else. Your energy says something else. And quiet people notice those contradictions immediately. Ironically, people also tend to reveal more around quiet individuals, because silence creates psychological space. Most people become uncomfortable during silence, so they start filling it. They overshare, they ramble nervously, they reveal emotions accidentally, they expose insecurities without realizing it. Meanwhile, the quiet person simply listens. And real listening is rare. Most people don't actually listen to understand, they listen long enough to respond. Quiet people often do the opposite. They observe carefully. And when someone feels genuinely listened to, they unconsciously reveal more of themselves. That's why people sometimes walk away from quiet individuals thinking, "Why did I tell them all that?" Because silence can feel strangely safe. But being highly observant also comes with a cost. Quiet people often absorb emotional energy deeply. Some people only hear words. Quiet people notice what exists underneath the words. They notice tension, discomfort, jealousy, sadness, resentment, emotional distance, even when nobody says anything directly. Someone may smile and say, "I'm fine," but their eyes look tired. Their voice sounds heavy. Their posture looks defeated, and quiet people sense that immediately. That's why emotionally observant people often become overwhelmed in crowded environments, not because they hate people, but because they absorb too much information at once. Fake conversations become draining. Forced energy becomes exhausting. Emotionally chaotic people feel heavy to be around. And eventually, many quiet people begin distancing themselves from others. Not because they want to be alone forever, but because solitude feels peaceful compared to constant emotional noise. Silence becomes recovery. Distance becomes protection, and one of the hardest parts about being quiet is constantly being misunderstood. People often assume quiet individuals are shy, weak, antisocial, awkward, insecure, boring when in reality, many of them are simply observing more than they speak. They don't feel the need to constantly perform for attention. They speak when something actually matters. And because they process so much internally, they often struggle expressing everything externally, which creates loneliness, because being deeply aware can separate you from others, especially in a world that rewards loudness more than understanding. Sometimes quiet people feel like outsiders watching life happen around them, like they understand people deeply, but rarely feel understood themselves. And eventually, many stop trying to explain what they notice, because once you begin seeing through people consistently, you realize how predictable many masks really are. The fake confidence, the fake kindness, the fake concern, the fake friendships. Quiet people notice contradictions quickly. Someone acts supportive publicly, but speaks negatively in private. Someone pretends to care, but disappears when you actually need them. Someone acts emotionally strong, but constantly seeks validation from others. Observant people notice these patterns early. That's one reason quiet people usually keep their circle small. Trust becomes difficult once you start recognizing how inconsistent human behavior can be, and the more aware someone becomes, the harder superficial relationships feel. But sometimes, this awareness didn't develop naturally. Sometimes life forced it to develop. Many highly observant people grew up in environments where they constantly had to read emotional changes carefully. Maybe there was conflict inside the home. Maybe they lived around emotionally unpredictable people. Maybe they experienced criticism, tension, rejection, or instability early in life. So their brain adapted. They learned to scan the room constantly, to notice emotional shifts quickly, to recognize tension before conflict started, to stay silent and observant as a form of protection. Over time, that survival mechanism became part of their personality. And even years later, their nervous system still monitors everything automatically. That's why many quiet people feel mentally tired even when nothing stressful is happening. Their mind rarely fully relaxes. It's constantly observing facial expressions, tone changes, energy shifts, reactions, hidden emotions without even trying. And despite understanding people so deeply, quiet people often struggle feeling emotionally connected to them. Because most conversations feel surface level. Small talk, repeating routines, pretending everything is fine, talking without actually saying anything meaningful. Meanwhile, quiet people often crave depth, real honesty, real vulnerability, real emotional connection, and when they don't find that, they start feeling lonely even around other people. Because physical presence doesn't always create emotional closeness. Sometimes being surrounded by the wrong people feels lonelier than being alone. That's why many quiet people enjoy solitude. Because solitude feels peaceful. There's no pressure to perform, no fake energy to maintain, no emotional games to decode, just silence. And for highly observant minds, silence often feels safer than people, but society tends to misunderstand silence completely. Loudness is usually associated with confidence. Meanwhile, quietness gets mistaken for weakness. But real strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is emotional control. Sometimes strength is restraint. Sometimes strength is observing before reacting. Quiet people often think carefully before they speak, before trusting, before opening up emotionally. And while others underestimate them, their awareness gives them advantages most people never notice. Because people who observe deeply understand patterns more clearly. They notice manipulation, emotional inconsistency, hidden intentions, behavioral repetition, dishonesty long before others do. And awareness changes the way you experience people. Once you start seeing patterns, it becomes difficult to ignore them. For example, quiet people often notice when someone's kindness feels performative rather than genuine. They notice when someone compliments others only to gain approval. They notice when someone constantly seeks attention while pretending not to care. They notice insecurity hidden behind arrogance, pain hidden behind humor, loneliness hidden behind loud personalities. Because observant people eventually realize something important. Most human behavior is compensation. People often become loud to hide insecurity, funny to hide sadness, cold to hide pain, angry to hide fear. And quiet people tend to recognize those emotional masks faster than others. That's also why they sometimes seem emotionally distant themselves. Not because they lack feelings, but because they understand how dangerous vulnerability can feel around the wrong people. Many quiet people learned early that not everyone deserves access to their thoughts, so they become selective, careful, reserved. They observe people before trusting them. And honestly, that caution usually protects them from a lot of emotional damage, because highly observant people can often sense unhealthy behavior before it fully reveals itself. They notice controlling personalities quickly. Manipulative energy. Jealousy disguised as jokes. Passive aggression hidden inside politeness. And even though they rarely confront it directly, they remember everything. Quiet people are often underestimated because they don't react dramatically, but silence does not mean ignorance. In fact, many quiet people notice far more than they ever reveal. That's why some of them seem emotionally distant after spending enough time around people. Not because they stopped caring, but because awareness can become emotionally exhausting. When you constantly notice fake behavior, you start feeling disconnected from shallow interactions. You stop enjoying forced conversations. You stop chasing meaningless attention. You stop trusting easily. And eventually, you become more protective of your peace. That's why many quiet people disappear for long periods of time. Not to punish others, not for attention, but because isolation helps them mentally recover, especially after too much emotional stimulation. And interestingly, many highly observant people also struggle with overthinking, because noticing everything means processing everything. Their minds replay conversations repeatedly, analyzing what someone really meant, why energy suddenly changed, whether someone was being genuine, whether tension existed beneath the surface. And while this awareness can make them emotionally intelligent, it can also make relaxation difficult, because their brains rarely stop scanning for meaning. Sometimes quiet people wish they could stop noticing so much, because awareness can become heavy. You begin seeing things most people ignore: fake friendships, hidden resentment, emotional dishonesty, unspoken sadness, and eventually, you realize how disconnected many people truly are from themselves. But despite all of this, quiet people often care deeply. In fact, many quiet individuals are extremely emotional internally. They simply express emotions differently. Instead of displaying feelings outwardly, they process them inwardly. That's why quiet people often feel things intensely without showing it openly. A simple rejection may stay in their mind for weeks. A painful comment may replay for years. A meaningful moment may affect them deeply even if nobody notices externally. Because quiet people often experience emotions privately. And that hidden emotional depth is one reason they understand others so well. Pain increases awareness. Loneliness increases observation. Silence increases reflection. Over time, these experiences shape the way quiet people see the world. And perhaps the strangest part is, many quiet people genuinely wish others understood them better. But after enough misunderstandings, they stop trying to explain themselves. Because explaining deep thoughts to surface-level listeners becomes exhausting, so they remain silent. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they learned most people only understand what fits their own perspective. And maybe that's why quiet people often connect more deeply with music, art, writing, psychology, or late-night thinking, because those spaces allow emotions to exist honestly without interruption. No performance, no pretending. Just truth. And in a world filled with constant noise, truth becomes rare. Maybe that's why quiet people value authenticity so much. Because once you spend years observing human behavior, you begin craving what's real. Real conversations, real emotions, real loyalty, real connection. Not performance, not appearances, not social masks. And maybe that's also why quiet people sometimes seem emotionally detached, because after seeing enough dishonesty, protecting your peace becomes more important than pleasing everyone. But despite everything, quiet people are often the ones who understand others most deeply. They notice suffering people hide, the exhaustion behind forced smiles, the loneliness behind attention-seeking behavior, the fear hidden beneath arrogance, because they've spent years studying human emotion silently, even when nobody realized they were paying attention. And honestly, some of the strongest people in the world are quiet, not because they fear speaking, but because they understand the value of silence. They know not every thought needs expression. Not every conflict deserves reaction. Not every person deserves access to their energy. That level of restraint takes emotional maturity. Because staying quiet in a loud world is difficult, especially when society constantly pressures people to perform, impress, and compete for attention. But quiet people often see beyond all of that. They understand how temporary most attention really is. And instead of chasing visibility, they focus on understanding, observing, reflecting, feeling. And perhaps that's why they notice everything, because silence allows the mind to see clearly. While everyone else is trying to be heard, quiet people are paying attention. They notice the pauses, the inconsistencies, the hidden emotions, the truths hiding behind words, even when nobody else sees them. So, if you're a quiet person, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe your mind simply processes the world differently. Maybe you were never meant to be the loudest person in the room. Maybe your awareness is both your strength and your burden. Because the people who notice everything also carry things nobody else can see. And sometimes, the quietest minds are the deepest ones of all. If this video made you understand yourself a little better, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more hidden psychology stories waiting for you on this channel.